You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 206 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. Now, to mark Farm Safety Week this week, we are discussing what is probably one of the most important topics in farming. That's keeping people safe and well on farms. My guest is very well placed for this week with rich experience in occupational safety and compliance across a number of different sectors, which includes agriculture. He's currently the Director of Risk and Safety Compliance Services, which provides health and safety auditing, management and training services across the UK. Yes, I am joined by Richard Wade. Rich, welcome to Meet the Farmers. How are you doing?
Ben, good afternoon, and I'm doing extremely well, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me onto your podcast. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you for coming on. And yeah, like I say, it is Farm Safety Week, so it's great to be able to mark it in this way. Let's talk about you first of all, though, because you were in the Army Medical Corps for over a decade.
Yeah, I was, Ben. I joined the British Army in 1982, and I joined the Royal Army Medical Corps with the intention of becoming a combat medical technician, which I did. And I did that for a couple of years after my basic training. But then and this is linked to what I do now, actually, my health and safety career, I moved into Army environmental health. So I became trained in Army environmental health over the next 4, 5, in fact, nearly up to 6 years for the full training. And I continued in that career until I left the Army in 1997. So I did a 15-year career as a member of the REMC, and then became a medic, then an environmental health guy. And the environmental health is not that dissimilar to health and safety. In fact, one became the other. Army environmental health became Army health and safety people, and I've just continued in that vein ever since.
Yeah, just following on from that actually, and it's just come into my head, but I mean, health and safety as a whole, there's sort of this perception that health and safety is quite a new concept. Is that a fair perception, or is this something that has actually been taken seriously for a long time?
It's interesting, a really good question. And I was talking about this not all that long ago, actually, at a presentation I did. My opening question to my audience was, how long has health and safety been going in the UK then? And you get loads of different answers. You get some saying the 60s, and some often say, oh, it was 70s because the Health and Safety Work Act came out in 1974. It actually goes back to the 1800s. And so the first health and safety legislation that came into the UK was the Health and Morals of Apprentices in 1860, whatever it was.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was enacted because if you think back to that period of time, you had factories, looms, mills, heavy industrial thing, and all the kids were doing they weren't at school. They were grafting in these businesses. They were getting stuck up chimneys and doing all sorts of things. And they were obviously getting injured and made sick. So the Health and Morals of Apprentices Act was enacted, and it's progressed ever since. And just very briefly, bringing us into the modern world, in the 60s, you had the Officers' Shops and Railway Premises Act and the Factories Act of the 60s. That was like the real start of health and safety as we know it now. And then it all got sort of changed. The direction changed in the early 70s. And with the birth of the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974, and that's still the same today, by the way, that became modern, non-prescriptive health and safety legislation. And it's evolved since. During our time in the European Union, we were very heavily influenced by European directives, which we then acted into acts of parliament. Obviously, that's gone now, but the laws are still there. So it's been an evolution since the 1800s all the way up to today, and it will continue to evolve going forward.
And let's bring this into farming and your experience of the farming sector, because this could be said to be a bit left field, but of course it's still health and safety.
It is, and the first part of my journey from the medical corps into civilian life are very closely linked with health and safety. Just going back very briefly, the Army Medical Services Environmental Health Cadre effectively became the health and safety. It wasn't called health and safety back then, so I'm talking late 80s now.
Okay.
It wasn't known as health and safety, but within the military, health and safety started to become a thing, and within the Army, as the environmental health trained people, we were the natural conduit for that. So we were doing health and safety, just weren't calling it health and safety. And so fast forward now, many years later, when I'm deciding to leave the military in 1997, I already had a string of qualifications under my belt, civilian qualifications in health and safety. And I left the Army on Friday the 17th of July 1997, and on the Monday started a job with a London insurance broker working as a health and safety consultant, and I've never looked back since.
Wow. That's amazing actually, that transition towards civilian life, because I mean you hear quite a lot of stories out there that it's not quite as seamless as that for many people.
No, it's not. And I guess I was very fortunate. I had a bit of a step up the ladder, if you like. An old Army friend of mine, Tony, who had left a few years before, was already working for the company that I joined, and he introduced me to them, got me the interview, and the rest was kind of history. And the reason it then moved into like agriculture, landed estate health and safety was my safety career post-military has always been aligned to insurance brokers in some way, shape, or form. And one of those brokers that I worked for just over 3.5 years, not all that long ago, actually, 2017 to 2020, they are predominantly agriculture and landed estate focused. So most of their 10,000 clients work in agriculture, landed estates in some way, shape, or form. And I was the head of their risk management team. And I became really focused on the sector, and I loved it. And I've retained that passion ever since, really.
It is, of course, Farm Safety Week. Why for you is this an important week in the calendar?
Well, what Farm Safety Week brings home to me is an opportunity to refocus my mind, and hopefully others, through my actions and my publications, etc., my talks that I do, to refocus and re-educate people that, look, you're working in farming, you're working in agriculture. It's a dangerous game. It's dangerous, and it's killing and injuring and making people sick at work every year. Let's stop. Let's stand back and look. Let's look and see what we're dealing with here, and just try and get people to focus on danger, and more importantly, their own risks within their business operations, and to ask themselves the question, are you doing enough? Not just the law, not are you just compliant with the law, but are you doing enough? Are you proactive? Are you managing safety? Are you managing your risk to keep you, your family, and others affected by your work safe as possible? And that to me is really, really important.
You've worked in a number of different sectors, all with your health and safety hat on. So I'm just wondering, from your experience, how does farming and ag compare to other sectors, both in terms of, I suppose, the awareness of the issues, but also just how dangerous it is?
Well, from the danger perspective, if we talk numbers of accidents and if we talk numbers of deaths, it's up there at number one, and it's ahead of the construction industry, and has been for a number of years. It fluctuates over time. The last 5-10 years, accident statistics have genuinely come down from the early 80s, where typically in farming 58-60 deaths per annum, to the latest figures in 2022 where there were 25. So it's come right down. But over the last 5 years, the death toll in agriculture is always around 20, 22, 25. It's still high. So it compares not too favorably with other sectors. and even sectors that you look at and think, oh, that's dangerous, like construction, it compares quite badly. So there's work to be done. Still a lot of work to be done.
This episode is being supported by our primary sponsor, A-Plan Rural. Why did I want to collaborate with A-Plan Rural? Well, having got to know them, their team shares my passion for giving a voice to farmers, and we are both driven to raise the profile of farming voices to a wider audience. So it seemed quite a good fit. Quite frankly, together we will be able to do a lot more. A-Plan Rural do a lot of work on social media themselves, sharing farming accounts and farming stories. They have a rural community blog which shares farmers' experiences, and they also support a growing number of initiatives that champion UK farmers, including this podcast. So a big thank you to A-Plan Rural for supporting Meet the Farmers. What are some of the common issues that you see that are perhaps quite simple to fix?
Yeah, so the common causes of accidents, injuries, and ill health, and sadly deaths, tend not to change. I've done quite a bit of research over the years, and if you look at the last 10 years of data, all of which is available on the Health and Safety Executive website, you see that in particular the causes of death in the farming and agricultural sector are the same throughout that period. They fluctuate slightly, but not much. And it's simple things like people being killed by moving vehicles, people being killed by or being struck by objects, people coming into contact with machinery. And a classic example is the power takeoffs that you see on tractors and other items of farm machinery, people becoming entangled in that. Falls from heights, people becoming injured or killed by animals, and in particular cows and cows with calves. There's been a lot of news about that later, and I've done quite a few articles lately relating to incidents in that sector, and also things collapsing, be that hay bales or buildings or structures or stores and stacks of equipment. And then another one that's sadly far too common is people drowning or becoming asphyxiated, particularly from slurry fumes. So those are the typical things that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I mean, within those incidents as well, and I appreciate, you're not going to know the detail of every single one, but I mean, I'm assuming that these places will have risk assessments in place. They'll be doing all these they'll be doing surveys. They'll be looking at safety across the site, and yet it's still happening. What for you? And it's a very difficult question, but why do you think that is?
Well, I do have a view on that, and based on my experience, you've got different approaches to safety depending upon the setup of the actual farm, the business, or the agricultural business. So on the one end of the scale, you've got your big players, so you've got your big nationals. So there you've got systems, technology, lots of money, good management structure, accountability. That's one end of the scale where you see things done as you would hope they're going to be done everywhere.
Yep.
But sadly, that's not the case, because there's a different setup, if you like, where you've got the smaller farms who aren't so well funded, don't have the structure, the infrastructure to manage their business as it ought to be managed, all the way down to small family businesses. But the sad thing is, the risks are the same whether you're running a farm turning over 700 million or Billy Johnson's farm somewhere in the northeast turning over 800,000 or £500,000. They're still exposed to the identical risk. The difference is at the lower end of the scale, they're probably less well managed and certainly less well funded. And that's why safety advice, and again, going back to your original question, why is Farm Safety Week important? It's to re-emphasize that message to those who need the help. You've got to look at your risks, analyze what you're doing, and go and get that help and assistance and advice sooner rather than later, before it becomes too late. And one thing to mention here, Ben, that's very relevant in the smaller businesses, where you might have mum and dad and a couple of other members of the family. When it goes wrong in those businesses, it really hits home. And there's a classic example fairly recently, and I did an article in my newsletter on this one, where an uncle was allowing his brother's son to ride on the side of the tractor, and they went round a corner and the kid fell off and the kid was killed. And that's
Oh my
so
goodness.
that's so close to home. It's, this is, it's bad enough anyway. It's horrible. But when it's your close kin and family, the trauma of those types of incidents is just undescribable, frightening.
Yeah. Oh, that really hits home, actually. That
Yeah,
kind of
it
story.
really it does. Yeah.
Meet the Farmers is brought to you by RuralPod Media, the only podcast production agency to specialize in the rural sector. We're on a mission to make rural stories mainstream and help businesses, organizations, and communities like you tell your story through podcasting. Podcasting is a fantastic way of connecting with your audience, whoever that might be, getting your message out there and networking with leaders in your niche. RuralPod Media can help you by launching your new podcast or helping you with the technical side. We also provide podcast training and an audit service if you already have a podcast. You're not sure where to take it to next. For more information or to book a call, visit ruralpodmedia.co.uk. That's ruralpodmedia.co.uk. Taking this sort into a positive, because you can always, no matter what state your business is in, whatever stage you're in, there's always room for improvements. So some things perhaps to be aware of, I suppose, if
Yeah.
you're putting together a generic risk assessment,
Yeah.
what are the sort of rough areas that we're looking at around the yard, around the
Sure.
farm?
Well, I think the starting point for that, and I guess the message to anybody working in farming, agriculture, regardless of the size of your operation, is there's loads of help out there, and there's lots of free help out there. So the Health and Safety Executive website is a mine of information. It's fantastic and it's up to date, and it guides. There's videos and downloads, and the HSE actually put on free seminars throughout the year as well. So there's loads of stuff available. The starting point for anybody looking at safety is know what your dangers are, know your risks, but more importantly, seek some advice. And that could be from people who work in the health and safety field, or very often your insurance broker will have access to advice. And very often there are schemes within insurance brokers that actually provide funding, because it's in everyone's interest. The broker and the underwriter providing advice and guidance on safety and risk makes that a better risk and less likely to claim on insurance. So it's kind of a win-win. So seek the advice from your broker, or go and look at the HSC. And then some common things to do is know your problems. And the way to know your problems is by standing back and looking at your operations and doing a risk assessment effectively, looking at the buildings, looking at your processes, looking at your operations. So look at your people, look at your places, and look at the work that goes on in those, and then carefully analyze the dangers using the information that very often is freely available to you. Or if it is slightly complex, certain agriculture operations can be quite complex, particularly if you start involving dangerous activities, work at height, construction, fertilizer storage, that kind of stuff. Seek the relevant advice, but often it's just common sense. It's just a case. It's a case of doing it and standing back, looking at your operations and deciding what's dangerous and what's not. Let's look at the dangers. Let's look at those risky areas, and ensure that we're not exposing people to unnecessary risk. There's always risk. Let's be straightforward. It's a dangerous business, but it doesn't have to be a deadly business. It needs to be a managed risk process.
Just a little more about our primary sponsor, A-Plan Rural. They provide bespoke insurance cover for farms and estates. This could be for anything from tractors and machinery to a new exciting diversification venture. So for more information, visit aplan.co.uk/rural. That's aplan.co.uk/rural. To what extent does time play in here as well? Because I mean, farmers are busy people. They've probably got lots on their to-do list day to day, and often these accidents are going to be happening, aren't they? When someone is perhaps their mind's in different places, they're thinking about a million things. They're trying to do too much in one particular time. So, should we just be taking more time?
It's a great question, and it's such a big factor. Time, money, and stress are often key factors in accidents and incidents and damage to buildings and machinery. People, it's a busy life. People are up early and it's dark in the winter and they're working all day, and often they're working out in them fields at 10 at night with the lights on the machinery. It's long hours. It can be dirty work, whether it's wet or cold or hot and dusty. You've got both ends of the spectrum. So yeah, time and rushing and just trying to get stuff done, because it's a sector that's very much governed by external factors. So if the weather's good, you're out there and you've got to get your stuff done while the weather's good. And so long days can often become the norm, because things have to happen within a certain time frame. Time is a big factor, but it's just one of the factors.
Just bringing all this together, and obviously this week is all about awareness. But yeah, it's one thing for me to be recording this with you, and hopefully all the listeners will get something from this. But I'm a big believer that the best way to get information across is peer to peer. So what would you like, say, farmers listening to this? What conversations would you like them to be having with their peers?
What we need to be talking about is danger and risk, and ways that we can address and mitigate those risks on our own businesses. So people ought to be having regular communication, regular chats with peer-to-peer, and also with farm workers, whoever they may be. We've got contractors, we've got employed people, we've got seasonal workers. There's so many different people involved in these businesses and operations, and communication of safety is the key. So I guess it's a combination of talks, discussions, and documents, if you like, based upon the things you and I have spoken about. So assessing those risks initially, getting the required because there's certain documents that are statutory required, depending on the business and the numbers employed. So having things documented, and then having a very robust training process in place. That's really important. Often training and toolbox talks and safety meetings and safety moments. It might just be 5 minutes at the start of the day where people talk about, we're going to do this today. These are the dangers. Are you ready? Have you got this? Are you wearing the right equipment? Are you competent? Do you know what you're doing? And often if that becomes part of the business, if that becomes a routine, you can iron out a lot of the dangers, if you like. You can't get rid of them, but we can lessen the likelihood of them occurring.
I'm going to ask you the last few questions I ask everyone when they come on the show. The first is, Rich, you have a message for the public. Any message, what would it be?
I do. Around farming, I would say be very cautious when you're walking across fields. And if you've got a dog with you, or you've got your children with you, and you see any great big lumps of beef on 4 legs, don't go anywhere near them. They're not friendly. They're not there to be patted or petted. And they're very, very dangerous. So pay attention, members of the public. Keep away from animals. And parents in particular, if you're in the countryside or you live in the countryside, educate your children on the dangers of farm safety, of which there are many. To kids, it's a great playground, but it's a deadly one.
And your message for farmers?
Very simple for farmers. Know your risks, assess your risks, and put measures in place to keep people, including your staff, yourself, your family, visitors, contractors, members of the public, put simple measures in place to mitigate those risks and keep everybody safe.
And finally, if you have one, a recommendation for a blog, podcast, or social media account to follow, that can be farming or non-farming.
Well, I'm a big advocate. So if we're talking farm safety, Health and Safety Executive, absolutely brilliant. It's a brilliant website. It's always up to date, and there's a section on there where we can learn from other people's mistakes and misfortune, sadly, but it's all a learning game. So you'll see regular updates about, and I follow it closely every week, and I have alerts set up. Something goes on in the agricultural sector, I want to know about it so I can tell my customers, look what's happened here, let's make sure we've done X, Y, and Z. And the final thing is training. I can't stress people need to get their people trained in health and safety.
Well, Rich, thank you so much for coming on today. This special week marking Farm Safety Week. Please, listeners, stay safe on your farm. Get the advice, as Rich was saying there, and put yourself in, you and your team, and everyone else around you as well. I think there were great points you made about family as well, especially for family farms. Make sure that everyone is safe and well on your farm. We will leave it there. But Rich, thanks for coming on. It's been great
Thank you,
having you.
Ben. I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
That is it for today. If you haven't already, please do like and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Next week, I am talking to dairy farmer, consultant, writer, and Nuffield scholar, Anna Bowen. Looking forward to that one. Thanks again to Rich for today and to our primary podcast sponsor, A Plant Rural Insurance, for supporting the show. Please see the show notes for more information and for any links mentioned today. For now, though, I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have a great week.